Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Carly P. Riley Show. Today on the show, we're going back to the roots of where this show started in many ways, which is covering the trial of Sam Bankman-Fried. I have just returned from the courthouse where I heard Judge Kaplan sentence Sam to 25 years in prison. Specifically, he sentenced him to 300 months and some other things, which we'll get into here at the end. But I have to say, I was expecting to go into court today. I thought it was going to be fairly quick. We'd hear the sentence, we'd get out. No, there was actually a lot that happened today in court that I thought was quite interesting. We heard from Sam Bankman-Fried himself. We heard from both the defense attorney and the prosecution. We heard from a victim, one of the customers of FTX who lost money in FTX, who was really speaking on behalf of many customers. And of course, we heard from Judge Kaplan. And I think the rationale that Judge Kaplan gave, everything Judge Kaplan said about the sentencing and why he was doing things the way he was is quite interesting. And I'm eager to get your thoughts on this. So let's dive into it. So one of the big questions going into today's sentencing was whether or not Judge Kaplan would consider the fact that FTX customers are going to be paid back. Now, there's a lot of questions around, are they being paid back in full? Are they being paid back in part? I don't want to get into all of that right now, though I have covered that in a past episode. And I do highly recommend folks go check it out. There's a lot of important questions being raised by FTX creditors and the customers that I think are very worth people knowing about. But without getting into that here, this is something that Sam and his defense attorneys were trying to argue is that, well, see, the $8 billion or whatever that I allegedly stole, well, actually, there's still $8 billion there. Customers are going to be able to get some of all of their money back. You know, that should be taken into account when you consider sentencing me. So out the gate, Judge Kaplan resoundingly rejected this argument. And he actually compared it to a thief who steals money and then takes that stolen money to Las Vegas and then makes a bunch of money on the slot machines and then pays back some of the victims. He said that you do not get a discount on your sentence simply because essentially got lucky in Vegas. And the judge talked specifically about just because the Anthropic investment has done well, just because I don't think he necessarily named Anthropic by name, but he said just because some of the investments have done well, just because cryptocurrency prices have gone up by quite a bit, none of this means you didn't steal this money. So I will say, out the gate, in a number of different ways, Kaplan came on strong and clearly was siding with the prosecution repeatedly, which is something he did during the trial as well. So I think all of us, or I certainly was like bracing for, okay, we got a big sentence coming here because he seems to be rejecting every argument made by the defense and he is accepting pretty much every argument made by the prosecution. Which gets me to something that I found really interesting, which is that the prosecution had argued that also factored into Sam's sentence should be the fact that he, in the prosecution's view, obstructed justice. And Judge Kaplan agreed with this. Judge Kaplan said he agreed that Sam had obstructed justice. He believed that Sam did it in a few different ways. First, he said Sam, while he was out on bail, so this is probably a year ago at this point, when he was out on bond before he was locked up, Sam had tried to get in touch with the former general counsel for FTX. I believe Can's son is who he tried to reach out to. And the judge said that was witness tampering. That was a part of why Sam ultimately had his bail revoked and was then held in MDC prior to his trial. The judge also said that Sam perjured himself, and he cited 3 specific examples of how Sam on the stand during the trial perjured himself. The 3 moments that Judge Kaplan cited for Sam's perjury were he said that Sam lied when he said that until the fall of 2022, he didn't know that Alameda spent customer deposits. Kaplan said that Sam lied when he said that he first learned Alameda had a liability of $8 billion to FTX in October of 2022. And Judge Kaplan said that Sam lied when he said he didn't know that the repayment of Alameda loans back in June of 2022 would mean that Alameda would need to borrow more money from FTX customers. Now, notably, Judge Kaplan said that though these are just 3 moments in which he believes Sam perjured himself, they are not a comprehensive list of all of the moments that Judge Kaplan believes Sam perjured himself. Later on, Kaplan would say that in his 30 years as a judge, he had never seen a performance, that's the word he used, like the one that Sam gave on the stand during this trial. He said that Sam was evasive, that he tried to manipulate prosecutors to get them to ask questions that would allow Sam to give a better answer than the answer to the question that was actually asked. Basically just saying that Sam was lying, evasive, and manipulative while on the stand. Now that was all just to kick things off. And from there, we heard from Sunil Kavari, somebody who's been very active on Twitter on behalf of creditors. I've corresponded with him a bit, and I was glad to see him there. Sunil is based in London. He came to this trial to sort of speak on behalf of creditors in general. Judge Kaplan did cut him short because I think the typical purpose for a victim statement in court like this is for them to talk about how the defendant's actions impacted them. So it really more typically centered on like, how did Sam Bankman-Fried's actions impact Sunil and other victims? Sunil took this opportunity to also air grievances that many of the FTX customers have around the way that the bankruptcy is being handled. And this gets into the issue I was referencing earlier, this idea of like, are they actually getting paid back in full? Again, I almost don't want to dive into that because I've already talked about that in a past episode. But I will say Judge Kaplan cut him off, Sunil off, saying like, hey, this sort of isn't the forum for this. I hear you. I understand your arguments, but I'm not in charge of the bankruptcy proceedings. That's a different judge. So like, take it up over there. I will say I have an episode. I have a new episode coming out about the bankruptcy proceedings. Probably will come out on Sunday in the next few days. I really encourage people to come back and check that out because I actually fully agree with Sunil. I think the way this bankruptcy is being handled raises a lot of questions and a lot of concerns, and that there's a lot of problems with the way this bankruptcy has been handled. And I totally understand customers being frustrated by that, but perhaps this was perhaps not the forum in which to air those grievances. Nevertheless, we heard from Sunil, and he talks about how it has been painful for him and other victims every single day since the FTX collapse and since many people lost money. And he referenced people who killed themselves and ultimately committed suicide because of the stress and the pain of losing money in FTX. And so some of that was, of course, quite powerful. From there, we heard from Sam's new defense attorneys, Mark Mukasey, who was not the attorney that was with Sam throughout his trial. That was a man named Mark Cohen, both men named Mark. This defense attorney, Mark Mukasey, I have to say, he seemed much better than Mark Cohen. So I've only now heard him speak just this one time, as he did today in court, but I found him way more compelling and much more moving. I mean, honestly, I'd put it this way. I think Mark Mukasey believes that Sam is innocent, or perhaps innocent is too strong of a word, but like is defensible. I don't think Mark Cohen believed the case he was fighting. And that makes a really big difference in terms of a defense attorney. And that difference, to me, at least, that was my perception, is it felt stark. Mukasey gave a pretty compelling speech, I felt, in terms of basically just saying the picture of Sam that has been painted to the public is very different than who Sam is at his core. He went through and talked about Sam from childhood on up, how before he was famous, before he had all of this money, he was consistently someone who was concerned with doing good in the world, and that, he gave away a huge portion of his salary when he was at Jane Street, again, before he was famous, trying to counter this narrative that the prosecution did and has continued to put forward of Sam as being very calculated and crafting a very particular image for the public that is totally at odds with his personal villainness or whatever. And I thought Mark Mukasey did a very compelling job of painting that picture. And he also did something interesting, which was that he talked about a convict, a man named Stephen Irving, who I assume is somebody that was sentenced by Judge Kaplan, based on the way that Mukasey was talking about him. In any case, Stephen Irving, this man, a convicted pedophile, who was a school teacher, who then was later discovered to be a pedophile, so clearly had molested apparently young boys in particular, who was sentenced to 21 years in prison. And so Mark Mukasey was making the argument, like, you cannot tell me that this person, that Sam Bankman-Fried, is more of a risk to society than Stephen Irving. So he was making this argument specifically around this idea of how much of a risk is Sam to society. And so you should take that into account in sentencing. He also made an argument about deterrence, saying that Sam is sufficiently deterred that spending just one night in MDC, which is the prison in which Sam has been kept while this trial has gone on, he said that just one night in MDC is essentially enough to deter someone like Sam from ever wanting to go back there, so that he didn't need to add on many, many years to his sentence simply to deter him from future crime, because the deterrence was already there. From there, we heard from Sam Bankman-Fried himself, the one and only. I have to say, we heard from Mark Mukasey, his defense attorney, who I thought did a very good job and who was moving and who I think did a service to Sam. And then Sam got up there, and I think Sam did a disservice to Sam. What you expect in a moment like this, or I should say what I was expecting in a moment like this, what I think would have served Sam best is for him to stand up, to profusely apologize, to talk about the pain he has felt, the remorse he feels, yada, 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 and then make it quick and heartfelt and then sit yourself back down. That is not the approach that Sam took. Sam was pretty long-winded. It felt rambly. He did apologize in the beginning, but it's the way that Sam has been apologizing for this all along, which is it's not really fully taking responsibility for any crimes, which of course makes sense that he's not doing that because he's still planning on appealing this case, but more just apologetic that he had made mistakes that had led to these outcomes. And there's a difference. There's a difference between like, I'm sorry that I fucked up, which is something that Judge Kaplan actually quoted later. There's a difference between like, sorry, I made some mistakes, and sorry, I engaged in a criminal behavior. And Judge Kaplan is clearly very keenly aware that Sam has apologized for the former and not for the latter. So he's not taken responsibility for doing anything criminal, but he is, sorry that he has made mistakes that has led to this outcome. Sam, in his remarks today, definitely perseverated on the idea of really wanting customers to be made whole. And in doing that and talking about that issue, clearly took some shots at John Ray III and Sullivan and Cromwell and the current management team that is overseeing FTX. Something that I thought was striking was that Sam over and over again, or multiple times at least, said the money has always been there. The money is there now, and the money has always been there. Customers should get all of their money back. And he referenced, he's like, I agree fully with what Sunil, the FTX customer who spoke, I agree fully with what Sunil has said. They should not just get their money back as of the date of November of 2022 when everything collapsed. They should get their money back as of what crypto is worth today. This is this thing that I have been dancing around and sort of referencing throughout this episode. So Sam, talked a lot about that. And I think while I actually agree with Sam, I do think that the current bankruptcy estate has not been running things well, as I've said, and I have an episode coming out about that on Sunday. And I think it's pretty startling what is going on in the bankruptcy. And of course, customers are once again the people being screwed in this whole thing. Though I agree with Sam on all of that, this was not the time or the place. It came across as deflection. It came across as it's not how Sam should be coming across in a moment where he's supposed to be like apologizing for what he's done and asking for a more lenient sentence. It was just like not the time and place. Okay. Then we heard from the prosecution. Frankly, I didn't think there was anything noteworthy in that. The prosecution said he has stolen $8 billion and reiterated the things they've been saying for the last year and throughout the whole trial, things which Judge Kaplan largely agrees with, which brings us to Judge Kaplan. So at this point, we've all been sitting there for, I don't know, 2 hours maybe, and we're all like, the anticipation has now built about what this sentence is going to be. It did in some ways feel sort of cinematic. I was nervous. I don't know why I was nervous, but I think because I don't know how these things typically go, because I haven't ever gone to a sentencing hearing before, I thought it was going to be quicker. I thought we were going to find out the sentence sooner than we did. So in some ways, I feel like the anticipation had just been building within me for 2 hours as I heard all of these people speak. And so I was nervous. And Judge Kaplan then, the prosecutor's done speaking. I think we're finally going to get to the sentencing. And then Judge Kaplan is like, I would like to say a few things before I tell you the sentence. And this is really where Judge Kaplan laid out his view of the whole situation. He talked about Sam's background, saying he was privileged. He mentioned that Sam is diagnosed with autism, high-achieving, high-functioning autism, but that makes him socially awkward and at times come across very unlikable, which I think was Kaplan's attempt to give a nod to the defense and say like, hey, I hear you, because the defense didn't use the word autism, but referenced that. And so Kaplan was saying like, look, I hear you, I understand that. But fundamentally, Kaplan said what he kept coming back to was a moment in Caroline Ellison's testimony in which she said that Sam would flip a coin if heads, the world ended, but tails, the world was 2 times better. And Caroline gave that in her testimony as evidence of the way that Sam thought about risk, and that he just had a different perspective on risk than other people, that he felt it would be worth flipping that coin, even if there was a 50% chance that the world ended, if it meant that there was a 50% chance that the world got multiple times better. And Kaplan said that this story, this anecdote by Caroline Ellison on the stand really stood out to him as essentially being a motif, I believe he said, but like the theme of this whole case. And what followed from that for Kaplan is that he did believe that Sam was at risk of doing harm again in the future, because he felt like Sam's worldview has not changed, that fundamentally he is somebody who measures his life according to expected value, which folks who have been following this case will know he does, but that expected value calculation coupled with how that makes him view risk taking means that he hasn't really learned his lesson from this whole situation. And following on from that, Kaplan said he doesn't feel that Sam is particularly remorseful, and again seemed to point out this differential, not quite in such terms, but this was my interpretation of things, what I mentioned earlier, which is that Sam is apologetic that he's made mistakes, but he hasn't expressed any remorse for anything criminal or taken any accountability for any level of criminality. He also, which I thought this was very interesting, he also said that Sam was an excellent marketer who had clearly shown himself as somebody who would be very persistent with the media, who wanted to get their narrative out there, was very good at trying to push a narrative out in the world by using media. And he said, and Kaplan said, you can already see, even just based on the statements that Sam made today in court, that you can see the new story that Sam is concocting. And this tale he is spinning of, well, now the bankruptcy lawyers are to blame, and his own attorneys, own past defense attorneys are to blame. And Kaplan said, I can already see the new story he's looking to tell. And that is concerning to me as well. Again, it ties into this whole, like, there's no real remorse, there's no real accountability here. Now, the other thing Kaplan said here before he sentenced him that I thought was very interesting here was that he needs to maintain faith in the justice system, essentially, in the criminal justice system. He said that the criminal justice system in this country and in any country, he said, works only if people believe that it is an honorable system and have faith that the guilty are punished fairly and the innocent are set free. He said that is a cornerstone of criminal justice. So he was saying part of what I need to factor in when I sentence Sam is if the average person out on the street who has loosely followed this case, when they hear about this, they need to think that the sentence is roughly fair. They can't think this person got off too easy or perhaps was sentenced too harshly. It needs to feel fair to the average person. That was something that was really interesting to me, that he is thinking about that, because it makes sense, frankly. And so what was so interesting is all of this is what leads up to this moment where Judge Kaplan is going to pronounce the sentence. And at every turn, Kaplan has seemed to be quite favorable to the prosecution and unfavorable to Sam. And it was funny because I was sitting next to Choose Rich Nick, if folks are familiar with Nick, who's launched the Choose Rich movement on social media. And we were sort of looking at each other being like, oh, it's going to be 40 years. Like, Sam's getting 40 years because the prosecution had asked that Sam get 40 to 50 years. And just based on everything that Kaplan had said up to that point, it was clear he was favorable to the prosecution. I didn't think that he was going to go for the full 50 that they were asking for, but I was like, it seems like he's going to go for 40. But then after that, Kaplan said that he did not think that the 40 to 50 years that the prosecution was recommending Sam be sentenced to, he did not think he thought that was too much. And he said he thinks it's too much based on the new reduced sentencing guidelines that came out last year in 2023. There were new guidelines that came out that reduced sentencing terms across the board for convicts. I actually agree with that, by the way. Like, I do think we are putting too many people in jail and we're putting them in jail for too long, frankly. So Kaplan, that was the only thing Kaplan, though, said to justify why he rejected the 40 to 50 years. But he did say, the fact that I'm not going to give him 40 or 50 years, I don't want that to come across as me not recognizing the seriousness of this crime. He said, I think this is a very serious crime that has been committed. And then ultimately, he sentenced him to 25 years. Now, it was not as simple as that. It was not like 25 years. It was, I sentenced you to 240 months for 4 of the crimes or 5 of the crimes you've been convicted of. I sentenced you to 60 months for 2 of the crimes, but these months will be served concurrently. So when all was said and done, where you landed was 300 months, 25 years. And then also that Sam, essentially restitution, Sam is fined like $11 billion and $20 million, $11 billion, $20 million. But that is somewhat irrelevant because there's other ways that can be satisfied. And so the big thing that matters here is the 25 years, the 300 months in jail. Now, how do I feel about this? I don't know. I know a lot of people wanted him to see put in jail for forever. I'm not in that camp. But again, I'm broadly somebody who thinks that we put people in jail too often and for too many things. I think the harm that he caused was very real. I think it's true that he has not shown sufficient remorse or taken sufficient accountability for what he's done. But that is different to me than I do think he feels bad. I do think he really wants to see customers repaid. So that's where it's tricky. Like, I do think he is somebody who hates that this has happened, certainly. And I do think it's weird because he gets compared to Bernie Madoff or to Elizabeth Holmes, for example, who, by the way, was only sentenced to 12 years, which I think is interesting. And yet those people, Bernie Madoff, Elizabeth Holmes, were running purely fraudulent companies from the beginning. There was no way for the Theranos case or the Bernie Madoff case to end other than the way it did, which was ultimately the glass house or the house made of cards was going to collapse. The thing with FTX that makes it in some ways all the more devastating is it didn't have to end this way. They had a legitimate business, a legitimate product that made a lot of money. It did not need to be the case that this whole empire collapsed, which on the one hand, I think makes Sam feel even worse or guiltier to me in ways. On the other hand, it was less guilty, or not less guilty, but this wasn't the intent from the beginning. I don't believe that this was the intent from the beginning. I do think that this was a series of really bad decisions, criminal decisions that led to this, and he needs to be held accountable for that. But it does mean that it's distinct from Bernie Madoff in my mind. So I have to say, I overall think I feel actually okay with 25 years, but I think this is sad. I think the whole thing is sad. Again, the fact that this happened at all is sad. This did not need to happen. There's a legitimate business here, and it could have continued and just thrived and made its $1 million a day or however much money FTX was making at its peak, which was a lot. Customers did not have to go through this. The way this bankruptcy has happened, I think, is sad and hurting customers once again. I mean, this whole thing did not and should not have happened. And at a minimum, we are now at the end of this one particular chapter in it. All right, folks, that is our episode for today. I hope you did enjoy. Please do comment below, like, subscribe if you have been enjoying this content, and please come back, tune in on Sunday when I'll air this episode talking more about what is happening in the bankruptcy broadly, because I think it's worth listening to. All right, folks, till next time.